Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through the first 12 stanzas of a really interesting poem from the 9th century, and that is Hrafnsmál, also known as Haraldskvæði, and it was written by Thorbjorn Hornklovi, who was a skaldic poet. So this is really fun. It's smack bang in the middle of the Viking Age, so it's literally the kinds of poetry the Vikings themselves would have listened to. And it tells of the exploits of King Harald Finehair, who was, of course, a mythical king who united all of Norway under his singular rule. Now, the poem itself actually takes place in the form of a conversation between a Valkyrie and a raven. Although, as we're going to see when we go into these stanzas, I think there might be a couple of other characters in the poem, or there could be, certain scenes where it's taking place. Which leads me to the emojis, because since this poem is recording a conversation, these actually aren't marked in the text itself, but we can tell based on context which character is saying which line. And so in order to make that clear when reading through it, I've added in these little emojis. So the speaker emoji is what I'm using to represent the poetic narrator itself. So that's neither the Valkyrie nor the Raven, it's just the poet himself speaking. And then for the Valkyrie, I used this little baby because, it's a human face with wings. I figured it was closest that I could find. And then for the Raven, when the Raven speaks, I'm using this eagle emoji because I could not find a Raven Unicode emoji that I could use in its place. So, with that being said, a quick thing I should say before I get into reading it is that I'm going to try my best to pronounce this Old Norse here as it would have sounded based on what the actual text in the manuscript is. This is a transcription from a manuscript. So, I might make some mistakes here and there. I may slip into the standard reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation, which is 13th century Icelandic. So forgive me if my pronunciation is a little inconsistent there. And as usual, if you want to pause the video and have a go at reading through on your own and then checking your translation against what I say, can feel free to do so. And without further ado, let's get into hearing this Old Norse. Hlýði hringbærenir meðan frá Haraldi segik, oda íþróttir enum afráðga, framóðum munk segja, þeim seg mei heyrða, hvíta hadbjarta, es við hrafn dömði. Hvítar dóttir gualkria, verðan ei orðu þekkir sváni franleitu, es fogosrad kunni. Quaddi en glahwarma och en querquitja humis hausrava, es satt å horni windberga. What is yther hrafnar? Hvaðan þeir komnir með dreyrgu nefjari region verðum? Hold loðir yther í klom, rasdefr gengur or munni, narðhygg í not bjóguð fís vissut næ liggja. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Hlýði hringbærende. This is one of the ways, by the way, that we know that this poem probably starts off in text, but we don't have the ending of this poem. It's a fragmentary poem. So, Hlýði hringbærende, may the ring bearer listen. And it's technically a singular ring bearer here, but it's being used in the sense of may every ring bearer listen. And the fact that they're saying ring bearer here implies that the poet is envisioning his audience as being the men who wear rings that have been given by the king. So these are going to be retainers, men in the mead hall, basically. Meðan frá Haraldi segik, oda íþróttir einum afráðga. So this is introducing us to a feature which Thorbjorn Hornklovi, I had to check his name, Thorbjorn Hornklovi loves to do, which is to separate dative clauses quite a bit. So frá Haraldi and enum afráðga all go together, and it means concerning Harald, the excessively wealthy. And then the oda íþróttir are the accomplishments of spear points, so the battles, basically. So may the ring bearer listen while I tell of the accomplishments of spear points concerning Harald, the excessively wealthy. Hrafnsmál mun ik segja. I intend to speak about the speeches. Theim zek me herða. Those which I heard the girl. Now, there's an implied to say here. Those which I heard the girl to speak. And we know that theim-s, which is a construction for theim-er, goes with Hrafnsmál because both of these are dated plural. So I intend to speak about the conversations that I heard a girl say. The girl who was Hvita, white, hardbjarta, having white hair, as with Hrafn who was discussing with the raven. Witra thought is Gwalkria. The Valkyrie seemed wise. Wera ne orðvekir swa eni franleitu. So men were not appealing to this fierce woman, es Fogelsrad Kunni, who knew the language of birds. I have to say, by the way, I find this quite cool. Just the idea of a human or humanoid figure knowing the language of birds, and also that it's just Fogelsrad, right? It's a singular language which all of the birds share in common. Although this could have simply been a metrical choice, calling it Fogelsrad in order to alliterate with Franleitu. That's also possible. I just like the idea of there being a single bird language. So moving on. En glahwarma och en querquita. So the white-throated woman and the bright-eyelashed woman, Quadi, addressed, whom is Hausrafa. Now Hausrafa is like, literally house is skull and Rafa is like a picker. So a skull picker, someone who's picking at the empty skulls. Hymis of Hymis. And then this is interesting. Es sat a horny windbjarga. Who sat on the corner, or at the corner, Windbjarga. Now, we could so when I looked this up in a dictionary, I got a definition of cliffs, but I'm wondering if it's maybe coming from the prefix win meaning wine, and then björg meaning a mountain or a mound, and perhaps this is a sort of weird reference to a mead hall, especially given that this raven is sitting on the corner, right, at the corner of this. So it's clearly a sort of quadrangular structure that we're talking about here. So I wonder if the house Rova here is sort of meant to draw a kind of metaphor between the ravens drinking out of skulls and the humans drinking out of goblets. You know what I mean? Like the ravens are drinking the blood and the humans are drinking the mead, and they're sort of coexisting in this space. Or maybe even this is like some place for the slaughtered where the blood is readily available as food for the ravens, although I don't think the latter interpretation is particularly likely. I just think that's an interesting parallel that's being drawn there. So anyway, that's the narrator setting the scene, telling us what's going on, and then the Valkyrie says, "What is either Ravnar? What's the deal with you ravens? Wharan there come near? Whence are you come, med dvergu nevi, with bloody nose, at degion verdum, at the start of day? Hold lother either e clum." So you hold flesh in your claws. Ras vergenger or muni. The stench of slaughter comes out of your throat, or rather of rotting flesh, comes out of your mouth. And then here's another one of those instances where he's separated the dative. So it's all the way to nar and then thvis. But let's do the hig first. Hig e not bjoguth. I reckon you all dwelled tonight narthvis near to where visith noilia. You know that corpses lie. So there you go. And then the narrator continues. Oh, sorry, I'll read these stanzas, that's how I normally do it. So stanzas 4 to 7. Hreyfrisk en hosfjadri och av hörnutherri, arnar eidbróðir och ansvorðum hugdi. Haraldi wer fylgdum sinni halvdannar, ulgum ynglingi, síðan orð eggi komum. Kuna hugdak thik konung, thans a quinnum bir, drotin nordmana, djupum raðar kjolum, radnum rangum og ráðum skjoldum, tjorgudum orrum og tjoldum drifnum. Úti vil jóldekka, ef skal ein rata, fylgir en framlindi, og freisleik heia. Ungerleidisk eldvelli og inni att sitja, varma dingjueda vottu dunsfulla. Herði í havarþvirði hwei hizug bardisk konungren kinstorli við kjötva en átlagda. Knerre komur ástan knaps af listir með ginnundum hofdum og grofnum tenglum. Alright, so what does all of this mean? Hreifdisken hosfjadri. The hoary, the grey-feathered one, shook itself of hurnuterdi and sort of hopped off the corner. And when I looked this up, by the way, I got the corner of an axe blade. I don't know if that's what this actually is. I'm not too good at Norse, but that's what I got when I looked it up. Arnar Eid Brodir. So the eagle is being described here as the sworn brother of the eagle, which is quite interesting. Ok answarðum hugdi. And said in response, although the actual verb here means to think, so that's an interesting thing. It could perhaps imply a sort of telepathic communication, although I don't think that's a particularly likely reading. It's just a fun one to imagine. So then the raven says, and then we have another huge separation of the datives. So we'll do the verb first. Where to fylg them? We have followed. Harald, Sinni Halfdanar, the son of Halfdane, Unglum Ynglingi, the young Yngling, Síðan or eggi komum, since we came out of the egg. Kuna hugdak thik konung, thans a quinnum bir. I think you know the king. This is an accusative infinitive construction, so hugdak thik kuna. I reckon you to know the king, or I reckon that you know the king. Thans a quinnum bir, he who lives in Quinnum. Now, Quinna is actually unknown, we don't know where it is, but it probably refers in terms of location to the royal farmstead on Ogvaldsnes. Sorry that I'm messing up the Norwegian pronunciation there. And it's near the present-day town of Haugesund in present-day Norway. So, he lives in Quinnum. He is the Drotin Nordmanna. He is the lord of the Northmen. And I find that personally quite interesting because I'd often thought of Nordmanni as a sort of exonym, but it is also an ethnonym, an exonymic ethnonym, which outsiders used to call the Northmen, because if you think about it, right, you've got Vikings raiding you who are coming from the north, it makes sense to call you Northmen, but from the perspective of the Viking, this sort of shows that from their perspective, they must have had a sense that they live in the north of the world, like they're not at the center of the world, and so they're going down to the south. I just find that kind of interesting. So this Lord of the Northmen, Djupum Radar Kjolum, he rules the deep boats, basically, the deep-boweled boats. Radnum Rongum, the ornate rungs, og ráðum skjoldum, and the red shields. Now, I think this red shields here is a reference to Harald's shield always being red, right, because he's constantly engaged in warfare. Tjorgudum orðum, with tarred oars, og tjoldum drifnum, and with driven awnings. Úti vil jóldrekka, he wishes to drink a toast outside, ef skal ein raða fylkeren framlindi, if the successful ruler of the people shall rule alone. Og phrase leik heia, and he will engage in phrase game. Now, scholars are unsure what exactly the meaning of this here. Based on the fact that Freya is the god of fertility, we might imply that this is a reference to sex, although that seems unlikely given that the very next clause of the sentence explicitly says that King Harald avoided sort of contact with women at a younger age, so who knows, it's hard to say exactly what the reference is here, but if you have thoughts, let me know in the comments. Ungar leidisk eldvelli, so that as a young man he grew tired of fireplace cooking, och inni at sitja, and sitting inside. Varma dingju, the basically the warm quarters of a woman, ever votu duns fulla, or mittens filled with down, which is very cute. Now, the theme here, which might be lost on a modern audience, is that medieval people, as I've said in other videos, broadly had these two, I guess, aesthetic poles where men were associated with hardness, hotness, aridity, dryness, etc., whereas women are associated with cold, wetness, and moisture, liquid. So there was also a stereotype, these were stereotypes which were associated with the physical bodies, right? So if you imagine a more masculine looking body or a more robust skeleton as compared to a more gracile skeleton or a more feminine looking body, to the medieval mind, that was because the more robust skeleton was belonged to a person who has more of a masculine physiology altogether, like in his humoric balances, he was hot and dry, whereas the woman would be cold and wet, respectively. And because of this, they believed that men having sexual intercourse with women would temporarily weaken their ability and suitability for combat. This is the very ancient origin of that bro science meme, which I've seen it recently in the Netflix cartoon series Hoops, which is quite bad, but I watch a lot of trash cartoons, where the coach says women weaken legs, and we see it even in Pedro Monte's 16th century treatise on combat. So it's a myth with a very long tradition, and in this case here, what the lines are implying is that King Harold, as a young man, grew tired of like the comforts of women and all of these things which are softening, right? Like fireplace cooking is going to be softer than food that's not cooked. Mittens stuffed with wool, these are going to be sort of soft garments, right? As opposed to the sort of literally physically hard garments of armor that he might wear to go out to battle. And also perhaps even the kinds of dry food that he might have to take with him on expedition. So that's what this line is sort of saying. It's giving somewhat of an explanation for why King Harold is so successful, and it's because as a young man he sort of avoided soft, comfortable things, and it sort of is that like meme which they believed in back then quite seriously, that hard times make strong men. So that's what this is saying, is that Harold endured hard times as a boy, and that made him into a strong man. So moving on to the next line. Herði í Haraldskvæði. Let them hear in Hafrsfjörð, or may they have heard in Hafrsfjörð. Hwei hisuk barðisk konungur in Kyn's story. How bravely the people mighty king, Kyn's story is a hard word to translate, protected himself with Hjotva and Audlagda against Hjotva the wealthy. So, yeah, oh goodness. Canaria, I couldn't speak for a second. And quickly, the quick thing also about Hjotva, it probably here refers to King Guthrek of Agthyr, which is, I believe, an Irish place. I just had to get that reference in anyway. So, Canaria komu austan. The merchant ships came. Now, literally, austan means from the east, but from context here, we can tell that it means from the south. Just bear that in mind. Cups of Listir, out of desires for conflict, for battle. So this line actually vindicates the image of Vikings that present-day historians are trying to emphasize a bit more, and sometimes people view that as like, oh, it's super woke, they're trying to like feminize the Vikings, when modern historians say that the Vikings were raiders and traders. And here in the line, you literally have the exact same merchant ships that are used for trading are those same ships that are eager for battle and conflict, because the two went hand in hand for the Vikings. So these ships came midginundum hovdum with gaping heads. So this is referring to the like dragon carvings that they had on the prows of their ships. So like it's saying that the jaws of the dragon on the side of their ship was like on the front of their ship was gaping wide, och grovnum tinglum, and with engraved ligaments. So let's read through stanzas 8 to 11. Hladnir orðu holda a hvitra skjalda, vigra vetrana a kvalskra sverða, grenjuðu berserkir, gudru was þeim á sínum, emjuðu úlfhednar og ísorndurðu, freystuðu en framráða es þeim flöya kendi, alsfalls ástmanna es byrra utsteini, stóðum nokva bra, es var styrjar vanni, hlómum wassa hlífum, aðar haklangur felli, leiðisk dafir lufu landiar halda, hilmi gennum halstingra, holum leist kat skildi, slogusk unses stiljur, es sarðir oru, leitu upp stjólu stuppa, stungu í hjólhofdum, a baki leitu blikja, barðir áru grótir, svafnis salnafra, segjir hyggjandi, öttisk áskulful og á jaðar hlópu heimur hafresfyrði og hugðu á mjólkdrykkju. Okay, so what does all of this mean? And this Hladnir is referring back to the Knærðir from earlier. It's the merchant ships. So the merchant ships were loaded, and then all of these genitives here are the different things that they were loaded up with. So Halda with men, not surprising. Hvitra skjalda with the white shields. Now, I think there is some kind of implication here that these are the ships that are belonging to King Guthrek of Agdir, or rather Hjorpa the Wealthy, because as we saw earlier, King Harald is the one who rules the Ráðumskjöldum. He has the red shields, whereas these guys have the white shields. Now, it could also be that this is how they painted the shields to identify each side. That's a plausibility. But I think that there's at least some degree of color coding going on here to imply that King Guthreth of Agdir's troops are, their shields are white because they haven't been slaying many enemies and they're inexperienced, The Wigra Westerner, the mighty Easterners. So this might seem like it contradicts what I was saying earlier, and it does to some extent actually, but we see this sometimes actually where in Old English literature, such as in the Old English Exodus poem, when Pharaoh's army is gearing up to fight the Hebrew army, the enemy is both like very cowardly and weak, but also very strong. And this sort of playing them up into how mighty they are is a way to have their cake and eat it to some extent. Like, when it's convenient, you can call the enemy weak. And when it's convenient, you can say they were so mighty, and that's why it's such a great feat that I took them down. Or it could refer to color coding. And I think the color coding is probably a little bit more likely. Could be both. So anyway, the ships were loaded with men, white shields, mighty Easterners, and Walskra Swerda, foreign swords, which is an interesting one. This could just be a reference to the fact that the king, I believe, was Irish. Grenjuru Berserkir, the berserkers, yelled, basically, or grumbled. Gudr was þeim á sinum, war was upon their companies. Emjudu Ulfhedna, the berserkers howled, og Ísorndudu, and they brandished their irons. Freystudu en framráða, so they tested the very successful Alwald's Austmann. This is the other one. The almighty Eastman, Esbyr at Utsteini, who lives at Utsteini, es them flöya kendi, who taught them how to flee. So the place of Utstein is probably in southwestern Norway. And I think this has to be referring to Harald here as the person who lives there, because this very successful, all-powerful man from the east is the one who is teaching them how to flee. So it must be referring to Harald, saying that Harald lived at Utstein. So when they say they tested him, by the way, it's referring to the ships that were coming to fight. Storðum Nokva Bra. So they disturbed the places of Noki. So Noki or Nokva was a mythical king of the sea. So when the ships are rowing in the waves, they're sort of dipping into his domain and they're disturbing him. Es was Styrjar Wani. He was expectant of, or hoping for combat. Hlomum was a livum. There was din upon the cliffs. Adar Haklanger felly, before Haklanger, also long chin, would fall. And this is often thought to be a nickname for King Olaf the White, who was a sort of famous Norse chief of Dublin, who came to assist his brother, King Guthreth of Alcthir. Leidisk tha fyr luvu landi at halda. Then they grew tired to hold the land against Luvu Hilmi and Halsdigla, against Luvu, the strong-necked warrior. Now, notice the framing here. So the verb leitha here is used to describe the other warriors getting tired, whereas earlier it was used, leidisk, to describe Harald himself. I suppose, Harald earlier is fleeing from these domestic comforts in the same way as the troops later would flee from Harold's armies. So they grew tired of defending the land against Lufa, the fat-necked leader. And apparently Lufu refers to an untidy lock of hair which lay upon Harold's head, because of course one of the legends around him was that King Ragnhild of Denmark rejected him because he wasn't King of Norway, and he vowed that he wouldn't cut or clean his hair until he was King of Norway, and then when he did, of course, he maintained his hair very finely afterwards. So they got tired of protecting the land from Harold. Holm leisg at Skildi. They left the island in departure, so they're fleeing. Slogusk und Sestilio. They sort of threw themselves under the planks, these being the planks of the ships, of course. Es sardir ordu, those who were injured. Leitu up stiolu stupa. They allowed their rumps to stick up. It's a very cute image, just like a bunch of foxes. Stungu I hjol hovdum. They sort of stuck their heads into the keel of a ship. Baki leitu blikja. So they allowed something to shine upon their backs. Now I think that's referring to the white shields. They allowed the white shields to shine upon their back. Bardir orgriotti. Their beards were on the ground. Suavnis salnavrar segir hugyandi. Goodness. Swafnir's hall ravens say, thinking. Ötisk Austkilfur. The eastern beaters, basically, Austkilfur, were worried of Yadar Hlopu, and they left Yadar, and Yadar refers to the southernmost district of Norway. Hlopu heim or Havresfjörði. They ran home away from Havresfjörð, or Kuktu a Mjodrykku, and they thought about mead drinking. And this is another trope that we're going to see in the next video covering stanzas 12 to 16 of like the association between mead drinkers and people who are unable to actually put their money where their mouth is when it comes to combat. But this video has already gone on long enough. In the next video, we will finish reading through Hrafnsmál, starting from stanza 12. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please, like, comment, subscribe to join my Discord server. We have a fun community of like-minded people who get together to, share memes and talk about our common interests. You come check us out. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.